Welcome to the Organ Podcast from the Royal College of Organists with me, Mark O'Brien. Coming up, I get a glimpse of the skill and training needed to be an organ builder as I get a tour of the Harrison & Harrison workshop with the head voicer and managing director, Andy Scott.
If you snap me in half like a stick of rock, it would say Harrison & Harrison inside. But you can say that of more than just me here at the firm. There are other people as well. But this is a firm that I know and love from the ground up very intimately, and I wouldn't do anything else.
And I talked to the American organist Katelyn Emerson about her career as a concert organist and her approach to teaching and interpretation.
So often it's almost too easy to get caught up in the technical and the mechanical aspects of the instrument. But in the end, the people downstairs, they won't necessarily be watching us play, and they can't admire the amount of work we're putting in to put a piston in the middle of something or to open or close a swell box. So the point is to make sure that the musical line, the musicality comes through no matter what, and that there's no bump in that just in order to get over some kind of mechanical issue with the instrument. So in many cases I will actually play with a lot fewer pistons so that I can ensure that the musical line comes through.
And for those wanting to know about the theme music that I play on this podcast, well, I'll tell you at the end. But first,
continue for 3/4 of a mile.
I'm just pulling into a very tidy looking industrial estate on the outskirts of Durham, as I'm about to arrive at the workshop of Harrison & Harrison, one of the largest firms of organ builders in the world today. They go back to the 1860s as a family business, including, of course, its most famous and celebrated member, Arthur Harrison, whose legendary voicing skills had such an impact on English organ building at the start of the 20th century.
Your destination is on the left.
Well, I'm here to have a look around the workshop and meet Harrison's current head voicer and managing director, Andy Scott, who started his career at Harrison's as a 16-year-old apprentice. And while I'm here, I want to find out just how important is that traditional role of the apprentice and the opportunities it gives to continuing and preserving the unique craft and skill that is organ building. Actually, I quite like this. We're near your office, and then you can look down. It's like an atrium. You're looking down into the works floor.
This is an interesting photograph here at the top of the stairs. This was taken on the last day in Hawthorne Terrace before we moved here to Meadowfield. And there's still a lot of people in this photograph work here today, including me as a young 16-year-old.
Is that you there?
Yeah.
Now, you've been here 30 years. You must be one of the longest serving here, or are there people who outdate you?
No, there are people on there who've been here longer than I.
But that says something about, well, working here and the type of role that they're doing, that very rarely people stay in the same job for that amount of time. So that's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, people are taught this career progression at school these days, whereas the majority of our workforce here, they come and join us usually when they're very young, age 16 like I was, or maybe after university, and then they stay here because it's such a unique craft that we do here, and you get a lot of job satisfaction from it.
Well, let's go downstairs now to the workshop. We're now going into this is your workshop.
Yes,
this is where everything happens.
We've just come through the main entrance foyer and we're now in what we call our building room right at the front of our workshop. So it's a very high ceiling in here with an overhead traversing crane, so we can build the organs up with great ease here.
I mean, I suppose we're just a bit larger than a tennis court with sort of bits going off it. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 men here working. Yeah, parts of organ at various corners. I can see some pedal pipes lying down there, but what looks like a lot of soundboards.
Yes, we've got wooden pipes and pedal pipes, we've got soundboards, we've got a piece of casework going off to Horden. So at the moment we've got a great diversity of projects in here, and it's always interesting to see what comes through the workshop. We can never predict what work's going to come in next, so everything we do here, each project's a miracle in itself. And we went through a phase recently of building new organs, Guards Chapel, Christchurch Greenwich, Christchurch Alexandria. But at the moment we've got a lot of restoration work in, so we've got Bristol Cathedral, which is being electrified but essentially restored tonally. We've got a little restoration work of a mechanical organ in St Mary's Horden, a pneumatic restoration of St Augustine's Kilburn, and also a pneumatic restoration of St Monica's Bristol. And we're also building a new organ for St John's College, Cambridge. So quite a diverse group of projects.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
And are they all in here? I mean, are bits of them in front of us?
Yeah,
Because let's go
all
down
around.
here. We've got
Let's
lots
go
of people
down
sort of doing more sort of like screwdrivers on it. Looks a bit sort of... So what made the 16-year-old Andy Scott determined to be a pipe organ builder?
It started a little bit before that, actually. I was a chorister and I was very late to the game, having just started high school. My father was also a club organist, and at home we had a Hammond with a Leslie speaker cabinet and the drawbars and stuff. So I suppose my early foray into organ voicing came on the Hammond organ, mixing the harmonic series and the different drawbars of the Hammond organ. So it was in me from a very early age. But it wasn't until I went to high school I joined the choir. And I asked the director of music at the time, who was Russell Missin, retired organist of Newcastle Cathedral. I said, could I have a play on the church organ? So I went armed with my busker books and my left foot hopping kind of secular repertoire, and he let me loose to explore what the classical church organ was all about. And that's where it all started, really. So I was probably about 13, maybe 14, when Harrison's had an open day in Hawthorne Terrace with the organ for Chestertown. Wonderful little two-manual mechanical organ for Chestertown in Maryland in the US. And I visited the workshop and heard James Lancelot play it in a recital. And I remember going up to Mark Venning and saying... And
he was the chairman.
And he was chairman, absolutely chairman, and managing director of the company. And I said, Mark, I'd really like to be an organ builder when I leave school. And Mark said, well, think before you jump, because you'll have a very interesting job, but you'll never be a millionaire. And how right he was. And so when I was coming up to leaving school, I decided I would write to Harrison's, got an interview and came to Durham, and I started as an apprentice in September 94 in Hawthorne Terrace. And that's how I got into it.
I mean, did you know what you would be doing? I mean, how was... You went as an apprentice. Where were the building blocks of learning the craft that you now have today?
My rite of passage came by working up from the building floor through the metal shop, and eventually having gone to see Mark and said, I'd like to try tuning and voicing. And in those days, tuning and voicing was reserved for the end of your apprenticeship, once you learned how an organ worked and how it was put together. Tuning and voicing, being kind of specialist disciplines, came towards the end. And that was it, really. So I ended my last couple of years of my apprenticeship were basically spent probably 2/3 in the voicing room and 1/3 in the workshop, which meant that I was going out tuning on my own, aged 18, 19 onwards, which, quite unheard of. Imagine an 18-year-old organ builder, still an apprentice himself, turning up with a 16-year-old apprentice to hold the notes to tune the organ. It's quite unheard of.
What do you start with? What's the rite of passage? Where do you start people off?
It depends where people are coming in. So we get people in here straight from school, age 16, like I was, knowing absolutely nothing. Or you come in when you've done a bit of college work, a bit of woodwork, and so on. But, generally what we get people to do is we get them to learn their motor skills, their hand skills, doing various joinery kind of things, dovetails, lap joints and what have you. And they do that by making sets of trestles for the workshop, because you always need a new set of trestles. So what they're making at the end of what they've made is actually something meaningful and useful. But throughout making that, they've learned the skills.
And does it really matter that you don't know anything about the pipe organ at this point?
Not at all, and the kind of love of the pipe organ might come along the way. The love of the pipe organ might not even appear at all, but everyone takes great pride in what they do. Yeah, so this is David, very recent addition to the family here, and so I think it's David's 4th or 5th week. David's a trainee with us, and he's busy working on some of the actions for Bristol Cathedral, and he's busy setting what we call valves at the moment, and these are the part of the action that moves to make the pneumatic mortars, the leather mortars, collapse.
Well, David, if I can just interrupt your work, did you want to work in the organ industry, to be an organ builder?
I'd never really thought about it, but the opportunity arrived, I've took it, and I've quite thoroughly enjoyed working here so far.
You're doing a craft here. This is very specific. Is that what makes it exciting for you?
Yeah.
That you're doing something, really, which I presume you wouldn't have been able to do had you not had the experience of learning it here?
Because before I started my apprenticeship here, I had a week work experience at a different place. So even though it's technically still joinery,
Yes.
it's just standing watching the machine do its thing, taking it off, putting another bit on, and pressing the go button again. And it's just a bit monotonous and boring, whereas this is actually doing something instead of just standing around basically loitering as the machine does its thing.
You're doing a lot of intricate work. You're working with wood, you're working with leather, you're at the moment doing something with a small wire and some pliers. Do you actually know what this does at the end of the day when it goes into an organ? Can you visualise the end product yet, or is that still to discover?
Not there yet, but on the process.
So that's probably quite fascinating for you to actually work out what this is going to do when you finished it.
Yeah, because obviously eventually all the pieces will fit together, because for the first few weeks I was making the valves, I've made the motors as well, and now it's putting them into what they actually belong into, and obviously it's all going to connect into the bigger picture.
And is this Bristol?
This is Bristol.
Oh, so it'd be a very big picture then when it's done. Well, David, thanks very much. Thank you very
No
much
bother.
indeed.
David's one of 10 of our apprentice and trainees here in the workshop.
I suppose for a craft like this, because looking at the level of intricacy that goes into making an organ, am I right in thinking that actually the role of an apprentice here is really important, because you can't come into this and do a course. You've really got to learn from the beginning?
Yeah, you've got to learn everything from the beginning. An organ's a massive, complex musical instrument. And what's interesting is we call the people who work here apprentices, but it's not nationally recognised by the government as an apprenticeship, because you get a piece of paper at the end of an apprenticeship here at Harrison's that says you've served a 4-year apprenticeship with Harrison and Harrison, but that means nothing in the real world. But it means a lot in the organ building world. If someone left here and said, I've served an apprenticeship at Harrison's, it kind of carries a bit of weight.
But I'm thinking about the actual experience, the training of the craft, because as David was just explaining there, you're not manufacturing, it's not an automated process. Everything here is handmade, it's bespoke. You're working, you're crafting wood, you're crafting metal, you're crafting leather, and then not to mention the high-end electrical stuff that you have to do as well. It's a very rare skill, I would have thought, and getting more and more precious.
Very much so, and one of the things in organ building is this: it's so diverse, the different skills that we need to have here. We have all, as you say, the electronics, the leather work, the voicing, the metal work, and when you go around the workshop and you see all the different disciplines, we would expect our apprentices to spend time doing each of those disciplines to try and give them that. And people can say to me, how long does an apprenticeship last in organ building? And of course, traditionally it's 4 years here at H&H, but an apprenticeship lasts a lifetime.
That's a long time, even 4 years.
4 years, yeah. And in that 4 years, you might not necessarily spend your time doing everything that there is to be done in organ building, and then you will end up with skills at the end of it, but every day is a school day. We've got Michael down there, who was responsible for masterminding the build of the Guards Chapel organ, and also Christ Church Greenwich, and also Canterbury Cathedral, and he's now currently in charge of St John's College, Cambridge.
So that's some pedigree.
He's had a few warm-up acts to this one. This is going to be the best one, he reckons.
Michael, if I can come and interrupt you. So, does the fact that it's going to be a really big, famous cathedral organ make a difference, or is it actually something in terms of the craft that you're doing that gives you the most enjoyment?
It's made of the craft, not to say that the place doesn't mean anything, because it does, but when you build it in here, it could be anywhere. It could be going to any church, cathedral, concert hall. It's all of the, we all get together and we all make every component and make sure it's all right. But when you go to them sort of places, you do get to feel the difference in,
when you see it no longer in the warehouse, but actually in a big chapel or cathedral.
You get to feel the scale of the place and the scale of the project.
And how long have you worked here?
Since I left school, so over 20 years now.
Wow.
Which made a
And do
difference.
you like organ music? I mean, are you keen on hearing those pipes at the finishing end?
I mean, when I left school, I had no idea what an organ was. I didn't know what it sounded like or anything like that. I just came here. I was interested in the woodwork, but as you work your way along and go through your apprenticeship, you get to appreciate what you're building. I mean, not to say that I'm really into organ music, but
Come on, be honest
get-
now, Michael. Do you listen to organ music? You build these big organs. Do you actually hear them?
I get to hear them. I don't actually go home and listen to them, but when you actually hear them when they're finished and knowing that you've had a part in that, it does give you satisfaction.
So clearly, you've been interested in woodwork, joinery since a young boy.
Yeah.
What you're doing here, I mean, would you find this level of craftsmanship anywhere else? I mean, from a woodworking point of view, where do you think you are?
It's very different. It's very different here. It's from woodworking as if you would go on the building site. You know you're going to build a wall or put a door in or make a kitchen. Here, it's so different. You could be doing any sort of woodwork, from building frame, swell boxes, building chests, soundboards, even down as very small things like roller valves, and it is a lot different.
So you couldn't do that anywhere else, really.
No, not really.
Yeah.
The variety in the woodwork here is quite vast.
And do you make pipes as well, or do you
Yeah,
stick
yeah,
to some?
yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we make the pipes in here. We've just done a stop for the guards one that I did, big 16 foot. We did a 32 foot one for Canterbury, which were 32 foot long. You could actually crawl down them.
Did you do that?
Yeah, we did, because we had to crawl down them and we had to seal the inside.
Oh,
so,
God, you had to go in it too.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I never knew that.
Yeah. So, and there's another 16 foot stop for this one, so they're quite big. But then we go down to making little small wooden pipes. So it is a variety. It's a vast woodworking. So
Well, Michael, thanks
it's
very
quite good.
much. Well, I'll let
No
you get back
problem.
to it.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
you. Really, to be an organ builder, there's patience. You need to be patient here because you're doing everything by hand. It's methodical. I think there's a lot of intricate detail. You really have to be able to take your time and focus.
It is important that you be methodical and take your time, and some projects come through here in a matter of weeks, other projects come through here in months, and the larger projects take years. So seeing the project from start to finish, a bit like the people who built our great cathedrals, the first person probably never saw it completed. Thankfully organ building's a little bit quicker than that, and we all get to see the end result. But yes, it does take time and patience to build it up. So later this year, once Michael's got all of the components built, he will move into the building room with his team where the organ will be actually built up, and we'll see a physical something that resembles an organ at that point, and that's rather exciting when we have the fitting up, and then from that moment it gets all taken down, packed up, and then that's when it goes to site, which is another milestone in the project.
Now, we've just moved into another area. I didn't know this bit existed. So this looks like proper woodworking machines, high industrial sort of saws and planes, and loads of timber on shelves behind us. I mean, I could be in B&Q right now, actually.
A pretty epic B&Q. Well, I often say to people, organ building's just like posh IKEA, and but no, these are all massive planks of board, poplar, pine, oak, yew-teal. But this is basically organ in its rawest form before it's even been put through the machine. Organs are basically engineering in wood and metal at the end of the day. That's where they all come from, the raw materials.
And would any of the planks I'm looking at now make it to Bristol? Am I looking at a bit of Bristol here before it knows it?
I think you're more likely to be looking at a bit of St John's College, Cambridge than Bristol, because the Bristol organ, of course, is the building frame and everything all exists, the swell boxes. None of these planks of timber will necessarily make it to Bristol.
But maybe St John's.
Maybe St John's.
That's quite fun.
It is fun, yeah.
I wonder from a skill point of view, in that case, organ building as a discipline, is it one of the few crafts that's left now that still employs centuries-old technique? Because, yes, you might have some modern tools, but the joinery, the metalwork, everything is bespoke, it's handmade. Some of it is along the lines of historic restoration as well as rebuilding. I can't think there are many industries where that level of skill and training has to be required at most levels?
Yeah, I like to think of organ building as a heritage craft skill. I also think it's, is it on the endangered list? I think it may well could be, and that's not because of people not coming into organ building, but we do have a look at these days the number of churches that are unable to keep their doors open and having to close. Coming into organ building, I think that the craft skills that we do have here, it's important that we keep those techniques up, just as it is to keep up the skills for doing lead roof work, doing stone masonry work. These skills, they're not necessarily jobs that people immediately think of.
But I suppose the thing about this is because of the level of craft and skill and the variety of instruments you work on, it does take a long time to learn that craft. Really, the apprenticeship, being an apprentice in a place like this, is key to keeping the industry going.
Absolutely, being a large firm like ours, it's crucial that we have apprentices continuing on the skills in organ building, and we're in a very fortunate position that we can pass those skills on. It does take a long time to learn how to be an organ builder, to learn all the different kinds of mechanisms, all the different kinds of restoration techniques, and of course the kind of work coming through our workshop, we have to use that work to teach those skills, and we may not get through a particular skill in restoration for a number of years, and then all of a sudden there's a project comes through where we need to bring skills in that we haven't done for a good few years, and you have to rely on those that have done it previously to then pass that to the next generation.
And are you seeing that? I mean, in terms of being managing director here, are you confident that there is the new blood coming through that will have enough basic training for you to build on?
Yeah, succession planning is a very important thing here at H&H, and with our apprentices at the moment, we're trying to give them as broad a spectrum of experience as possible, especially in those old techniques, so that we don't lose them. Before we head in the voicing room, I'll introduce you to Jeff Pollard, and Jeff's the 4th generation, and here he is.
Right, so Jeff, 4th generation, so I mean, from birth, you knew you were going to be working for Harrison's then?
I had a pretty good idea. My grandfather used to come and visit us when I used to live not far from the factory in Hawthorne Towers.
And are you doing the same work then? Is it what, your father, your grandfather?
My grandfather and his brother, the brother was a pipe maker, foreman of the pipe metal shop, and my granddad was a prolific soundboard maker.
And what do you do?
A lot of soundboards.
And really, from your family, you learnt the trade here. I mean, is this something as a young boy you thought, right, I want to do that, follow in their footsteps?
Yeah, he used to tell us all sorts of things about what he was up to when I was a little boy, and I think, oh yeah, I fancy some of that.
And do you think the work you do is any different? Have things changed, or are you actually following the same craft, the same tools, the same approach?
I do use a lot of my grandfather's tools.
Oh, good heavens. And so how old would these be?
Well, they're 100 years old at least now.
Good grief. I mean, who can do that? Who can be still using their grandparents' tools in the same industry, in the same company?
Biggest thing is if we're doing old work, we tend to use the old stuff and the old tools and all and everything. New work, modern work, we use modern ideas, modern glues and things like that.
Oh, really? So if you've got an old organ, you're doing a restoration work, actually the older tools seem to fit the older organs better than it. Isn't that extraordinary? And I bet you couldn't get those old tools, you couldn't make them now, you wouldn't find them.
No, we keep passing them on. Yeah.
Any organ that you're proud of that you know you had a big hand in making?
Family-wise, Coventry Cathedral and Festival Hall.
Now, were you part of that, or was that your dad, your granddad?
My granddad worked on Festival Hall, and then also when we recently did a cleaning overhaul and restoration, I worked on it.
That must have been quite a moment, it's quite moving.
Yeah, many a time I've found my grandfather's name inside the soundboard, T.H. Pollard in pencil written in, so I know he's been there.
And do you then put your name under it?
Yes.
Are you supposed to do that?
Yeah, it's allowed.
So where are we now?
We're heading to the metal shop now. So this is where all of our metal work gets done, casting, repairs, new pipe work and the like. And we've got 3 full-time people in here. Nigel, the foreman, who's on holiday at the moment. And then we've got Adam and we've got James, who's our metal shop apprentice.
And you're making pipes in here, you're repairing them?
That's right, new pipes, repairing pipes. So at the moment we've got pipes from St John's College, Cambridge going through, which is the former St Peter Brighton pipe work. They're getting cut open so you can get in and round them out where they've been damaged, and then soldered back together again. Adam here, he's still in his final year as metal shop apprentice, but we're also giving him the broad skills of an organ builder as well, so that when he goes on site doing things like wind trunks, he can also do general organ building as well, though he came here primarily as a metal shop apprentice with a specific role here as learning how to make pipes and repair them.
Yeah. So Adam, what are you doing right now?
This is the contra oboe
Yeah.
that was from St Peter's, but it's going to St John's College. So I've had to cut the bell off the top of it to be able to round it off.
So you can actually get
dents,
inside the pipe to sort of bend out the dents. Yeah. Now, so you're here in the metalwork, this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Do you actually have ambitions to progress through to different stages of organ building?
Yeah.
How do you see your role in the bigger picture?
Yeah, I think, well, when you get sent on site as well, you have to be willing to turn your hand to anything, whether you can give it a good go or not. And it is interesting to see how what we do in here plays a wider role in the context of the whole organ. So it is very interesting to be able to have a go at everything, and where better to do it than a metal shop that's attached to obviously an organ building workshop as well. Yeah.
And how long did it take you to get to where you are now, so in terms of the metalwork you're doing on these pipes?
Well, I've been here just over 3.5 years now, but I suppose it just depends on how good you are as to how quick you could pick it up. I might have done it twice as slow as Nigel did when he was taking on metalwork, but can be quite repetitive at times. But that's the same with everything in organ building. You know, you've got 60 odd of everything you do.
But I guess with this, your work, there's a bit of legacy, because what you're doing here is going into
hopefully
kind of very important building,
yeah.
and it will be seen and listened to for decades, centuries.
These pipes were made by a pipe maker well over 100 years ago. And I like to think that my pipes might last the same amount of time, although who's to say?
Well, I'm sure
hopefully I won't be around to see them go back in the casting pot.
Yeah, you won't have to repair them again.
Yeah, I won't have to repair them again, or hopefully won't have to see them go in the casting pot. But it's nice to have something, you know, I always say to people, I would hate to be sat at a desk in an office typing away on a spreadsheet that may get used once and then nobody ever remembers it or cares about it ever again. But this sort of stuff, it lasts a lifetime. You can go and appreciate the work for years to come.
Now, this sounds more familiar.
Yes, we're heading in to see Andrew Fidders, our associate voicer.
So, Andrew, if I can interrupt your work, what's going on here?
At the moment, I'm setting the Cs on an orchestral oboe. So what we do is we set the Cs and then we fill all the gaps in between. So I'm listening for where these are sort of tone-wise, whether they're a bit choked up or whether they're a bit too free sounding. So I'll get them all kind of balanced nicely.
So you start with the Cs. Once you're happy with the Cs, then that's your template for the rest of the notes.
Yeah.
And which organ is this? How old are the pipes? What are they?
These are Willis pipes, so they're about 140, 150 years old.
Gosh.
And they've seen a little bit of change, so we're kind of returning them to how they would have sounded in a Willis organ when it was originally built.
And are these robust? Because for something that old that's already been moved around, and then you've got, I don't know if you have to use heat, whether you're soldering things on or having to sort of bang things back with a hammer, but presumably there's only so much a pipe can tolerate.
Yeah, the pipes will tell you what they want to do, and because these are old pipes, they do start to suffer from metal fatigue after a little while, so they're quite soft. These are plain metal, so they're about 80% lead, which is soft to begin with. But pipes are always stronger when they're round. Pipes get weaker when they start kind of bending and get dints in them. That's what weakens them. So when they've been through the metal shop and been made round again, then they're as strong as they ever will be.
Oh, so you can repair them?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And can you tell? I mean, if you came in here and I blindfolded you and I put a pipe in front, would you say, aha, that's a Willis, that's a Walker, that's an Arthur Harrison, that one shouldn't be here at all?
With certain things, yeah, you can, yeah, because there's certain characteristics with a stop like this, with an orchestral reed. These are quite distinctive. So Arthur Harrison's orchestral oboes would have sounded different to Willis ones, and so on.
And you're doing this all day, because I assume we're in your domain here, we're in your room, so it's a sort of a breeze block part of the workshop. But I see over there on your desk, you've got loads of, they're short pipes, sort of about a foot, probably, on shelves. Are you here all day going through all of these pipes? Yeah, this is where I am
from the start of my shift to the end of my shift, really. And over there we've got mixtures on board, so when mixtures come in from an organ, they get laid out on boards so that we can see them from 1 to 61, and you have all the breaks.
But you're playing them all day during a shift?
Yes,
all week. Your ears must be bleeding.
It's very varied, because some of the time you're not making much noise at all. A lot of what happens in here is preparation. So a lot of the time the pipes aren't actually on the machine. Putting them on the voicing machine and making them play is the easy bit. It's all the preparation that goes into making that possible, and that's what takes the time. So we've got several benches with different things laid out, and what we tend to do is we do one process here and then move to the next bench and then move to the next bench, and then finally end up with the voicing machine.
But how long would it, a big cathedral organ, so, say a 100-stop organ, you're going to go through all of those pipes? Mm-hmm. How long is that going to take you to say, right, job's done, it can go back to the cathedral?
It takes as long as it takes, because it depends what happened to those pipes in their kind of life before coming here. It may be that, a bit like here, we're turning back the clock on pipes which have been changed, or if we're fitting in new pipes to match into an old scheme. So it's very variable. It's difficult really to put a definitive time on.
But are we talking days, weeks, months or years?
Each stop will take a certain number of days.
Gosh.
Some stops take weeks to voicing string pipes. For instance, a bearded gamba, a very narrow scale, that can take 2 weeks to voice.
So you dread when one of those come in?
No, we relish a challenge, really.
But how do you not get bored? Do you get bored? Like, oh God, I've been listening to this gamba for 5 days. I don't care. I can't remember what it should sound like. Just get me out of here. You're doing this for years. Why are you not bored doing this? Or are you just very patient?
Because every day is different.
Really?
No two organs are the same. Even two organs from the same builder in the same year will be different, so you're always finding something new, and a lot of it, like I say, is unpicking what's happened before, and finding out the story of what others have done to the pipes and what others haven't done to the pipes. Why have they been left alone for 150 years? There must have been something.
So you're like a scenes of crime officer
it's
here.
Sort, it is a bit of sort of crime scene investigation sometimes.
But Andrew, thanks very much. It's fascinating seeing. Here you are, overalls, blue apron, lots of old-looking brass tools. You've got your own wooden-made voicing keyboard here. It's just fascinating seeing it in this detail. Absolutely. But amazing you keep going, the stamina of doing all of those gambas.
Just what we do, isn't it?
Thank you.
It's just what we do.
It's an extraordinary story. You came here as an apprentice. You're now the managing director. You've been here 30 years. What was it that gave you, that skill at an early age to be able to tune an organ, never mind actually being able to voice it as well?
If you ask any of my colleagues on the shop floor, they'll always joke that when I pick a chisel or a plane up, you better have the St John's ambulance on standby. and there's always that kind of, if you're no good on the bench, son, you'll end up in the pipe department. And certainly it was a natural move for me to go into the voicing department and in the pipe department, and that kind of ultimately came down to me being offered the position of London tuner when I was 22. So I moved from the bubble of the northeast to working in London on some of the great organs down there at Southwark and Westminster Abbey and the Royal Festival Hall. I'm very fortunate that I was offered that position, but continued to work in voicing up until I became head voicer in 2012. But it's always been a passion of mine, is the musical side and how that all fits together.
Is it quite intimidating, though, particularly when you were young, going into those buildings, prestigious instruments, high-profile instruments like Westminster Abbey and the Festival Hall, and, there you are with your voicing tool or your tuning tool, banging away at the pipes? That's a bit of a responsibility to shoulder at any age, presumably.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of pinch me moments that if I think back through my career so far, every day is a school day and the apprenticeship lasts a lifetime in organ building. But yes, certainly going into Westminster Abbey and being on duty for many high profile national events, it's terrifying. But, if you'd asked me back in the day, would I end up working at Harrison's? If you said that to me as a young boy, Harrison's was the firm at the time. I never dreamt I would end up getting a job here. I never dreamt I would become London tuner, and I never dreamt that I'd become head voicer, and never in a million years did I dream that I'd become managing director. And people often say of me, if you snap me in half like a stick of rock, it would say Harrison and Harrison inside. But you can say that of more than just me here at the firm. There are other people as well. But this is a firm that I know and love from the ground up very intimately, and I wouldn't do anything else.
And are you unusual, having started off as an apprentice and then being the managing director of that same company?
Certainly at H&H, I'm possibly the first apprentice that's grown into this position. Some people have said to me, it's really good to have a voicer back at the top of the firm, like we had in Arthur's day. It's a good thing and a bad thing. I used to be a very hands-on person in one sense. I'm still a very hands-on person in another, but I've got much more focus on leading the firm now rather than actually being physically involved. But when you come down on the shop floor and you see what's going on, they can't pull the wool over my eyes because I know exactly what's going on.
Well, I doubt there's any chance of that. Andy Scott, thank you very much indeed for showing me around.
Pleasure.
This is Katelyn Emerson playing Louis Vierne's Naiads on the organ at the Cathedral of St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception in Peoria, Illinois. Katelyn has been described as one of the world's most promising organists. A prize winner on 3 continents, her technical and musical approach to the organ keeps her in demand around the world as a concert performer, teacher, and jury member. With an already enviable collection of academic qualifications, she's currently dividing her time between performing and taking a PhD at the University of Cambridge's Centre for Music and Science. I managed to catch up with Katelyn while she was in the middle of a concert tour playing over here in the UK. Well, Katelyn, I'm amazed I've managed to track you down because looking at your diary is something to behold. Barely 2 weeks ago, you were performing in Canada. Last week, you were in Atlanta. This week, you're in the United Kingdom. At the end of the week, I think you're in Germany. Next week, you're in Denmark. And I think it just goes on. Is this what it's like to be Katelyn Emerson?
Well, you've caught me in the middle of a tour on this side of things, so certainly for this month, that's what it's like to be Katelyn Emerson. But I would say more than anything else, there's just a massive variety in the style of schedule and the things I'm doing week to week, which is, in fact, precisely how I love it.
You are, first and foremost, a concert organist.
I've been very lucky. I mean, for a little over the last decade, my primary source of income has actually come from concerts.
And that's rare.
It is. I think every career is so different. So mine, of course, is rare because it's mine and it's nobody else will quite do it the way that I do. I've been extremely lucky, and it's quite interesting when it kind of all started, which was around 2010, 2011. I started thinking about it as a phase, and I didn't know when the invitations might stop coming, and I still, to some extent, feel that way. COVID, of course, was when not only the invitations halted, but we got all the cancellations. So it was one of those years just about where I just didn't want to open my inbox because I knew that there would be another cancellation waiting for me, which also makes me value it all the more now that we're back and we're able to travel and to share music once again with people in person.
You kind of well, I've heard it written about you, exploded onto the concert platform. You did that at an early age. You got almost straight away success. Most people, I think, really that's to achieve that level of success and fame on a concert platform is a progressive thing that people go through in their 30s and 40s. Have you kind of tried to work out what gave you the edge to suddenly make that impact and stay there?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I actually frequently get inquiries about how to create a concert career and how to, as you describe it, explode onto the scene. Which, of course, to me, it felt very different. It felt quite gradual to some extent. I think actually the danger is in thinking that one can do it in the same way as somebody else. I think I've been very lucky to discover some of my skills, which are talking to people and getting very interested in people in different places and different instruments. And I love being in contact with friends from afar. Different types of social media and email communication have been a huge part of just how I am as a person as well as how I am as a musician. So being in touch with people and creating an international network has been one of the joys of this strange career that I have. So again, I think that not everybody is skilled in that way. Some people are extraordinary performers to levels that I could never reach, and yet perhaps they're not quite as good at the networking. So again, they will have a very different kind of career, one that is equally or if not more successful than mine. So I think figuring out one's strengths and really leaning into them, utilizing them, and then finding ways to make up for strengths that you need but might not have quite as readily can be an excellent strategy for making your own way forward.
But part of that is the audience. They've got to show up to hear you play, no matter how good you might be networking or whatever. Is there something about your repertoire, how you play, your musical approach, you think that is part of that, I don't know if you set out to popularise the organ or it's just doing what you love? Is there something in the way you approach the music and the organ that you think points to some part of your success?
Sure. I mean, we'd all would like to think that we could have a finger on it. Mm-hmm. I suppose that what I've always tried to do is have a variety. I had some students last week ask if I have any kind of specialty. And my immediate answer to that is I really tried not to, because I find so much interest in the, almost 1,000 years worth of repertoire that we have for the organ. Not quite 1,000, but several centuries worth. So I find great interest in not only exploring that repertoire, but also then marrying it to the instruments and seeing what we can learn from that combination, learning about the different cultural contexts in which people were composing things, in which people were playing things, and then how we can draw that back to make it relevant to contemporary audiences and bring them back in time or bring that music forward in time to kind of create a bridge to the past and to our own heritages in a really special way. I don't know if that brings audiences to the concerts, but I think it's what many of my colleagues are trying to do, and it's something we can uniquely do with the organ because the instrument is so tied to the place and the time, and so is the music.
But I wonder if you're doing that in perhaps a slightly more distinctive way, because am I right in thinking that you approach the music, your performance style, the way that you program pieces for the organ, really kind of from a more academic perspective than perhaps other people do? I mean, you've studied extensively in the States, but also in France, in Germany. Do you look at things more academically, trying to break down the component parts which make the music?
I've always been a very analytical person, which also makes me, I hope, a good player, but also a very good teacher, because I like to figure out many ways to say the same thing, because every student learns differently, and I learn differently depending on what I'm trying to learn. So, of course, learning about the instruments, learning about the context, and then learning how that ties to organ building, to cultural history, things like that. And then prior to the concert, really thinking profoundly about how you might marry the repertoire and the instrument, and also how to create some kind of line throughout the program, so you're not only telling a story within a piece, but telling a story within the program, so you can take people, my husband always teases me, but take people on a musical journey throughout whatever it is, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 90-minute program. So people aren't just coming in order to hear a particular piece, I hope. They're coming to have the experience of experiencing this particular instrument played through perhaps a French Romantic lens, through perhaps a German Baroque lens, maybe a North American lens, showing off the instrument through the different cultural and musical histories in which we could perhaps take it.
But you've kind of lived that. So, I mean, you have spent significant time in France studying in Toulouse and in Stuttgart. You speak French. You fully immersed yourself above and beyond just simply the design of the organ. So I'm wondering, in that case, is the instrument informing your musicianship, or are you more on the cultural, social side of the music to give your style of interpretation?
Sure. I mean, none of these instruments were made in a void. So, of course, the cultural and historical background of what was going on at the time when they were constructed and when the organ builders were living is also going to hugely inform, if the Industrial Revolution was going on, what was available and how reliable it is. That, of course, will then inform the interpretation. For example, if you're playing a jigoo piece or something like that, you know that they've got barco action. But if you're playing it on a modern electropneumatic organ, you can outplay the action with no problem. You can play far too quickly so that each note won't be heard. But if you think about, and you've had the physical experience and the oral experience of sitting in that room, playing that barco action, hearing how it returns quickly, but not nearly as quickly as an electropneumatic organ, all of a sudden you will play it very differently when you return to the much easier action. And I feel that it, to some extent, will bring you a bit more closely to a vision of the piece that feels like it fits the piece more like a glove, instead of something that's being imposed on it just because we can.
So you choose the repertoire based on the organ you're about to play?
Absolutely, which means I typically have to have a lot of repertoire going on at one time.
I've also heard you say you don't allow the organ to get in the way of the music. That doesn't sound the way as you've just described.
Certainly. So that actually is an adaptation of something that one of my former bosses used to say. Mark Dwyer at the Church of the Advent. He was wonderful. He used to always talk about never letting a piston get in the way of the music. Because so often we, as organists, because there is so much going on in front of us and the instrument is completely different and we're dealing with an entirely different console and everything will have different orders, different numbers of keyboards, all of that. So often it's almost too easy to get caught up in the technical and the mechanical aspects of the instrument, which are amazing and fascinating. But in the end, the people downstairs, they won't necessarily be watching us play, and they can't admire the amount of work we're putting in to put a piston in the middle of something, or to open or close a swell box, or in a way to check a box, whether for ourselves or to prove something. So the point is to make sure that the musical line, the musicality comes through no matter what, and that there's no bump in that just in order to get over some kind of mechanical issue with the instrument or something that we're not quite comfortable with. So in many cases, I will actually play with a lot fewer pistons so that I can ensure that the musical line comes through.
But aren't you sacrificing in some way the expressive nature? If you're on a very big organ and you want to show its symphonic range, or are you not restricting it in some way just by focusing on a direction of line? Or do you think that's where organists might be getting it wrong?
Oh goodness, well I wouldn't say that organists are getting it wrong in any way. I wouldn't go in that direction, but I do think it's very important that we realize the tension between the challenge of the technical and the ultimate goal of the musical. Technique, in the end, is a means to an end. And technique, of course, also encompasses the way that we use the console, our console management. So we need to ensure that we don't play outside our technical abilities, even with console management. Because if that gets in the way of the musical goal, the end goal, then all of a sudden I feel like perhaps we've lost sight of how to get people to enjoy the organ for its musical attributes rather than its mechanical ones and technical ones. And I think both sides are equally important. But of course, as a performer, my ultimate goal is the musical one. So I always try and prioritize that in any way that I'm playing. And I hope that I still show off the wonderful symphonic aspects of instruments and that people hear the time that I take in selecting the colors. Often I think of it as being in a new kitchen. Every time you sit down at a new organ, you've got all different kinds of spices and you have to, try adding this, try adding that until you get exactly the right meal, the right combination of flavors for this particular instrument. And that often takes me quite a bit of time with an organ. So I truly hope that I'm not sacrificing anything. But I also hope that I continue to improve with all of these myriad goals, and that my combinations become more complex, and that there's increasing profoundness in all of the aural colors that I'm getting and the musical line to which I am kind of dedicating all of this.
But your analytical way into this is really, really important to you, because apart from holding down this demanding international career, you are doing a PhD at the same time, analysing the way different organists, I think, approach their interpretation. So you really are breaking this down to quite intricate components. I mean, why are you doing such a thing at a PhD level?
I find it absolutely fascinating how organists and musicians more broadly interpret in different ways, and how each of these ways to interpret is equally valid, and we might have strong preferences for one musician or another, but that certainly doesn't have any bearing on their success level or their ability to communicate with people more broadly. And I find this absolutely fascinating. So in a way, I'm trying to drill down a little bit into what causes musicians to interpret in different ways. And I'm very excited because I'm running a big data collection next year where I'm interviewing and working with concert organists from all over the world to see if we can chat with them about their interpretations and record their interpretations and see how the things that they discuss and the things that they pull from these wonderful pieces come through in their playing. So ultimately, to whatever extent each participant is happy and comfortable, we will be releasing aspects of this as open access so that other music information researchers and music psychologists can use the data for their own research and to explore organ playing further.
But is this part and parcel, I think, of you in terms of how you approach the musicianship, the performance style of the organ, that really this is you trying to inform your interpretation rather than have something where you're dictated to how to interpret a piece?
One of my early teachers always said, if the reason you're giving for a particular interpretation is my teacher told me to, then that is not a true answer. And I often repeat that to my students, and I understand wanting to lean into authority, but I do think it needs to come, especially in this day and age. I think we've moved to a certain extent away from the teacher as kind of the maestro and as the sole holder of information and holder of interpretive power. I think it's very important to internalize ideas, because then, once you've internalized them, you can apply them more broadly and make very important, profound decisions about your own interpretation. And that's what I've tried to do with mine, even though I've studied with incredibly strong personalities in the organ world who have offered incredible insights into organ playing, and I've tried to adopt them and adapt them to make them my own, and then hopefully to pass that on as well.
But I mean, are you trying to break away from that? So you're trying to avoid playing, this is because how we should play this is the style we should approach this piece. You're saying, no, we really need to go back, break it all down and make our own opinion of how to do it. I know that every musician probably says, well, that's what I do, but I don't think that actually at the end of the day is the case, because you may not have the time to do that, or you may not have the confidence to do that. So again, the way you are approaching things, is that giving you much greater control to make those decisions?
I hope so. I think we're very lucky in a way that we're coming after the historically informed performance movement, because I grew up within that context. So that was kind of very much part of my foundational learning, so I could internalize it in a way, and I wasn't trying to look for those answers from treatises. So I've leaned back into that quite a bit, and I think that, again, as things do, the pendulum is swinging from hip a little bit more center, so we can kind of take other influences besides solely treatises, besides solely the instrument, and we can look a little bit more broadly. And I'm really excited to see what that brings, because of course now we've got students who are maybe 2 generations removed from hip, and I'm really curious to see what the synthesis that they bring to this will be, because it will be something entirely new once again.
Is this kind of baggage that's unique to the organ? I mean, if you're a pianist, would you be having these problems and needing to do this PhD?
I'm sure there are certain stylistic trends that people follow, whether it be if people are still in the ideas of Liszt or Rubinstein or any of these giants. Yuja Wang today, Lang. You've got all of these kind of different schools of thought, and please, pianists, forgive me for speaking very much out of my own experience. But I think that we will always have baggage, because humans grow up in a context, and of course that informs how we see the world. So I certainly wouldn't be who I am without all of the baggage or all of the teachers and all of the cultural, historical background that I've lived in. And I think that's what makes it quite exciting, because then I can bring that and share that to other people who are themselves within their own context. And they will have a very different musical experience to me in that context.
You mentioned all those great pianists. Talking about, the basic function of money and concert hall platform when you're booked to perform, and that status, do you think the organ matches that?
I think so often many conductors are rather almost afraid to work with organ concertos, for example. I think in many ways it's easier to bring in a pianist. The colors are quite different to the orchestra, so to slot it in as a piano concerto, I think is less intimidating for conductors. It can also be difficult to find an organist, and of course in concert hall contexts, the level of organ that's available can be highly variable, and a conductor may have had a bad experience with the organ. When I've sat in on piano juries and organ juries, for example, I often notice that the level of musicality with players of the same age in pianists seems to be higher. And I often wonder if that's because so much, first of all, organ has a tremendous amount of history and we're expected to be able to play in such a massive variety of styles, whereas the piano is much younger as an instrument, and there's not the same kind of imposition of history onto the players. I often wonder if that, combined with the mechanical challenges of the organ, is causing us instead to have to deal with so many technical issues at the same age as pianists are able to use the technique in order to make a musical line.
Wow, so right, you think the technical demands and the breadth of the repertoire, that somehow organists are perhaps spread too thin so that they don't get the level of technique that a pianist would have?
Potentially, and of course most of us also come to it later. I came to the organ when I was 13 and the piano when I was 8. So, 5 extra years of study certainly
do you think that's significant?
I think so, because of course a lot of the technical study should be in those early years. So then you can have more facility. And then of course as organists, we're dealing with vastly different, again, consoles, pistons, everything is quite different every time we sit down. So again, the instrument can have the risk of getting in the way of making music.
But let's talk about repertoire. You clearly try to use the whole range of organ repertoire across the centuries. Do you think, though, that because there is a drive to popularise the organ, and in the way that social media can be so immediate, is there a risk actually that audiences' appetite for repertoire is being narrowed, and you as a concert artist, you find that the pool is getting smaller because the requests that are coming in or the music that people want to hear is diminishing the full palette of organ repertoire?
Thankfully, I think there's room for all kinds. We have colleagues who are popularizing the instrument and bringing film scores and transcriptions into concert halls and into churches, and I think that's incredibly strong and brilliant, and I'm so glad that they're doing it so I can continue to do what I'm doing and explore what I'm interested in doing and do that alongside them. I think there will always, to some extent, be an audience. There's incredibly niche interests in the world, and pipe organ, whether we like it or not, is already a niche instrument. So I think we can lean into that and play extremely modern repertoire that uses electronics alongside the organ. We can lean into it and still do historically informed performance repertoire. We can do film scores. I think there is a big world out there, and that there is room for all of us.
And well, you've been around most of that world and you continue to do it. Do you find that audiences request different things, or their approach to the organ is different where you go? And I'm particularly thinking outside of countries where the organ has a Christian baggage, basically.
Absolutely. I played several concerts in Russia, for example, where of course in the Orthodox Church you don't have any instrumental playing. And what's quite extraordinary about that, of course, is that you go to the concert, it's a packed house typically, and I looked out over the crowd and it looks like it's date night. You have all the girls with their heads on the shoulders of the young men, and you finish the concert and you go out and you have a gaggle of 20 10-year-olds waiting to get your signature afterwards. It's just got a completely different association there. And also, of course, as a Westerner coming, somebody who's quite foreign and speaks only 5 words of Russian badly, there's also that sort of exotic idea of coming to.
But I mean, 10-year-olds at an organ recital wanting the autograph, no matter who it. That is extraordinary.
It does happen, though, and even in the Western world, I think we have wonderful colleagues here who are getting exactly that, and it's very exciting.
You have a busy, successful global career concertising. You are a prize winner, many competitions on 3 continents. Have you made it? Is this about just keeping it going now, or what? Because you've done so much at still a very young age.
I've been very fortunate indeed. I still feel like it's a phase in the sense that, I typically try not to solicit invitations, and I'm honored that they keep coming, and I wonder if and when they'll stop coming at some point. In a way, I fell into the concertizing career, and I'm very grateful for it. I've loved continually getting to know new people, new instruments, new places, exploring new things, and getting completely out of my comfort zone. And I will continue this as long as people will have me and continue to seem somehow excited. I love teaching alongside of it. I'm getting more into music and science, and to perhaps being some kind of bridge between disciplines, with the emphasis in many schools that's on STEM and on more sciencey sorts of things. I'm very much hoping that perhaps I can be a person that helps to show the importance of music to the analytical side of things and keep us as integrated as possible and as essential as possible, which we of course are.
So you're kind of a kit of many parts. That's what you are.
An analytical kit of many
Yes.
parts.
Katelyn Emerson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for now. Next time, I talk to Richard Brazier about the research and impact of his astonishing new edition of the organ works of César Franck. And I get up close to the Tickell organ at Manchester Cathedral with the man whose vision it was to put it there, organist and master of the choristers, Christopher Stokes. But before I go, quite a few people have emailed asking about the music I play at the beginning and end of this podcast. Well, I'm afraid it's nothing special, but something I quickly made up myself as a theme tune that I could talk over, which wasn't recognisable and didn't sound like a church voluntary. So, just for fun, here it is, all 50 seconds of it, without me talking. So until next time, goodbye.